Good afternoon, Politics 1A at the APK campus. This lecture replaces the lecture we would have had on Thursday afternoon on the 8th of March. I'll run through from the beginning of the lecture on mass media and reach a certain point and close. This lecture is all about the mass media and political communication. Remember that the point of this lecture and the importance for the exam is to explore the extent to which the media shapes political attitudes. Also, we need to look at the politics of spin and propaganda in politics, and to discuss new media and the rise of e-politics. Remember how we went over the first 3 points about the importance of the media through the decline of the agents of socialization, being the family most of all, the development of mass television audiences since the 1950s, and the rise of new media and the effects that has on the general population, and the powerful economic actors like Time Warner, Disney, and Microsoft, among many others, that are media powerhouses who basically direct and control the media across the globe. We then moved on to the theories of the mass media. In an exam situation, I could ask you to discuss 2 theories of the mass media and critique each theory. In that case, I would expect you to discuss, for example, the pluralist model and to explain the pros and cons of that model. I could ask you to explain the elite values model and the pros and cons of that model. The first model is the pluralist model, which looks at the media as an ideological marketplace. Remember the discussion around the 1974 Watergate scandal, referred to here in this newspaper, where President Nixon had to resign over the scandal and controversy where he was responsible for the illegal wiretapping of his Democratic opposition at the Watergate Hotel in 1972. So the pluralist model suggests that the mass media can enhance the quality of democracy and guarantee that government power is checked. Consider Guptagate and Nkandlagate in South Africa's situation. The pluralist model argues that the impact of the media is essentially neutral in society because it tends to reflect the balance of forces within society at large. It also argues that the internet strengthens pluralism because it gives protest groups a cheap way to disseminate information and organize campaigns. Think about the Fees Must Fall campaign in South Africa from 2015 onwards, and how they used the internet and social media to great effect to organize themselves. The problem with this, though, is that weak groups in society may be excluded from access to mainstream publishing, and as a result, the weaker voices are not heard in the pluralist model. The dominant ideology model, which is cut off slightly at the top there, refers to the fact that media is politically conservative and is aligned to the interests of economic and social elites. In other words, the media serves to promote compliance in society, or at least political passivity amongst the masses, in order to try and ensure that the masses just go along or go with the flow, or are passive enough to accept what is dictated in that society. Marxists argue that ownership determines political and other views, and that ownership is increasingly in the hands of a small number of global media corporations. For example, Time Warner Incorporated or Disney, as I showed you on the other slide. And as a result, only a small group of people can control what people hear or see in the media on a daily basis. Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman came up with a propaganda model, which is on page 180 of your textbook. And that looks at how, number one, the business interests of the owner companies of media corporations help to filter what news is portrayed on a daily basis. Secondly, the views and concerns of advertisers and sponsors are always taken into account. So you see, what this is showing here on the side are the different levels of filtering before you can actually see something at the end in the news media. So what does it actually get filtered through in terms of the propaganda model? It first goes through the financial ownership. What do they have to say about something? It then has to pass through the advertisers or sponsorships filter, because they might have something to say about a story. It might have an impact on their product, for example. Consider how, in recent news in South Africa, the corporation Enterprise refused to apologize through the news media to those people that died because of that recent outbreak of the disease, listeriosis, because they said they had their own people working on testing their sausage material, etc. Those corporations would want to have a say in how they're portrayed in terms of their public relations, because it has a direct effect on how much money they make as corporations through the public's eyes. So it's filtered through the advertiser or sponsor. Thirdly, you have to consider sourcing news from agents of power in society, for example, government itself, which relies on public relations, and business-backed think tanks that are dependent on corporations or big business to keep themselves afloat, would most likely not be able to publish something that might go against that business's interests. Flack refers to pressure applied to journalists or the threat of legal action against something a journalist might write. So that's the fourth source of filtration here. And then you have the last one, which is number 5. Here it's referred to as anti-communism and fear. But more likely in this day and age, it's this unquestioning belief in the benefits of market competition and consumer capitalism. What this doesn't take into account is that mass media, by doing this, can somehow subvert democracy. It also suggests that this dominant ideology model means that the press in no way at all cares about social issues, and we know that is false. The example I gave in class was of Carte Blanche, which is a television program with investigative journalism dedicated to revealing social problems and how to resolve them, or making sure those responsible are accountable for their actions. Also, what about the role of people's own values in that society? Surely people can think independent thoughts and are therefore not completely brainwashed by a dominant ideology model. We then move on to the elite values model. This model shifts attention away from the ownership of media corporations to the actual mechanism through which media output is controlled. So basically what this view suggests is that editors, journalists, and broadcasters enjoy significant professional independence, and that even the most interventionist of media moguls are able only to set a broad political agenda, but not to control day-to-day editorial decision-making. They argue that the media's political bias, therefore, reflects the values of groups that are disproportionately represented amongst its senior professionals. There are a few versions of this model though, which is why we have anti-socialist, conservative, and feminist listed here. The conservatives, if we jump ahead to number 2, they believe the media reflects the views of university-educated, liberal intellectuals, whose values and concerns are quite different from those of the mass population. The feminists, on the other hand, if we look at number 3 here, they highlight the predominance of males among senior journalists and broadcasters, implying that this both explains the inadequate attention given to women's views issued by the mass media, and also accounts for the confrontational style of interviewing and political discussion sometimes adopted by male broadcasters and journalists. You can look on page 181 for more description of these 3 points of view. And finally, we end off with a market model of the mass media. And this model differs from the other models because it dispenses completely with the idea of media bias. It doesn't even consider media bias. It actually holds that newspapers and television reflect rather than shape the views of the general public. This occurs because, regardless of the personal views of media owners and senior professionals, private media outlets are first and foremost businesses. So what would you expect businesses to be concerned with? Profit maximization, making money, and extending their market share. So what the media does, therefore, is simply give the people what they want. It cannot afford to alienate existing readers or potential future readers by presenting political viewpoints with which those readers might disagree. What this model does tend to do, though, is explain some of the growing trends in politics today and in entertainment today, which is the rise of infotainment and the decrease in so-called political debate. When we follow the family life of the Kardashians more than we care about what's going on in our own societies, because this kind of infotainment is more glamorous and easier to consume, less difficult to understand, and as a result, there is less political debate in society. In 1983, Carl Jensen completed an investigation, and what he found was these 8 main points that news media would cover on a daily basis. These were the top 8 areas that the news would cover. So brand name news or celebrity gossip would always feature. Sex news or exposés would also be a constant. Yo-yo news, if you think about the yo-yo, which you, by reflection of the actual toy itself, you just flip it up and down on a string. So yo-yo means something that goes up and down, up and down. So statistics that change daily, like, for example, the petrol price or the exchange rate, how much the rand is to buy a pound, etc. Stock market numbers, box office totals are always featured in newspapers daily. Show business news is also reflected. Brief fads are reflected too. Consider in the modern age how every morning on 7:02 there's a section on what is trending on Twitter. You also have anniversary news. This year is the centenary of Nelson Mandela's birth, 100 years since he was born. So that a lot of the news that will come up this year, especially around July, will feature on Nelson Mandela and his contribution to South Africa's political history. Of course, there's always sports news and political news that follows directly on. Consider Trump on a daily basis and how he features in the news. We also then have the media, democracy and governance as a second section underneath the overall umbrella of the mass media and political communication lecture. How can the media promote democracy? Well, we're using the Facebook symbol here of liking. The media can and does promote democracy in 4 very key ways. The first one through fostering public debate or acting as an agent of political education. Secondly, by acting as a kind of public watchdog in society. Thirdly, by redistributing power and political influence. And fourthly, by being the vehicle through which democracy can operate. We'll move on and look at these in greater depth in Lecture 5.2, which follows directly on from this.